Hello, everybody. My name is Amy Martinson, and I'm chair of the Napa County Progressive Alliance. And I've been on the steering committee of the California Progressive Alliance for the past year. And I'd like to welcome all of you to the California Progressive Alliance Convention and to our environmental justice breakout session. We're fortunate to have some fantastic speakers today, including Chief Sisk, who is tribal chief and spiritual leader of the Winnemem Wintu tribe. And I asked and she agreed to do a blessing for our forum. So I would like to turn it over to Chief Sisk. Chief Sisk, are you with us?
I am now.
There you go. Sorry about that.
I have a hard time finding those buttons.
I know.
Anyway, I would like to do this blessing for us and our panel and the people who are watching on as well, because it's an important issue that we're going to be talking about and sharing and hoping to plant those seeds that people can do some things about these things. So if you are wearing glasses, I'd like you to take glasses off. If you have a hat on, take your hat off and just kind of take some deep breaths, maybe like 4 nice deep breaths. And I'm holding a root right now and it's burning for this prayer to go out into the world as we put it. And so that's why the deep breaths, because if you were here with me, we would be breathing this in together and helping our minds and our hearts to stay on this task and subject and whatever we can share to help open up the way to make things better, you know. And I also have some water here from our sacred spring, because we're going to be talking about that too. And it's always good to have that with you when you're going to be speaking to it, because following this, this water will be taken out and put by a tree so that those prayers can continue to develop and grow and include all of those that, you know, might need more help to understand things. So we're going to make this nice and easy for us. Elvis, Chalawita, Ukoan Ilawi, Winnemem Waiwaka Podum, Chalama Podum, Howana Chala, Bim, Wintutinis, Puyum Puyuk, Ukoan Ilawi, Chere Chereki, Howana Chala Bim, Ho and Chala Inur, Howana Chala, Milpim Birds. We're asking that the sacred mountains of Boyum Puyuk to reach out to the other sacred mountains around the world that hold us together, hold our Mother Earth together, and all of the water systems, the Salomim all the way to the ocean, to ask them to help us to understand these things and become carriers of their messages. And when we go out in nature, we would learn these things, and we'll, you know, sit by the trees and listen to the water go by. And so when we take our water in, we need to recognize, you know, where does it come from? It comes from the mountains. If it's groundwater, it still comes from the mountains and seeps down into the water systems. And these are the things that we need to try to better understand, besides the uses of water at this point in time. We have to open this up so that water will always be with us. Hoana chala bim, and tutinas ting ting, he chala biscuit, hoana chala, ho, hoana. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the beautiful blessing. It's a nice way to start our panel. Thank you. All right, so we do have 3 fantastic speakers today that I'll introduce to you as they're going to present. I do want to point out that I know you're aware of the chat box in Maestro. We hope that for the most part, you'll keep your attention on the speakers and use the chat for questions, because we will have a Q&A period at the end. And so with that, we want to get started. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Chief Sisk. And Caleen Sisk is the spiritual leader and tribal chief of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, who practice their traditional culture and ceremonies in their territory along the McCloud River watershed in Northern California. Since 2016, Caleen and other Indigenous women have led the annual Run for Salmon, a 300-mile trek that follows the historical spawning journey of the salmon from the California Delta to the Winnemem or McCloud River, to raise awareness about the policies threatening the state's waters, fish, and Indigenous lifeways. Caleen is also a leading voice in raising awareness of the poor human rights conditions suffered by federally unrecognized tribes and unrepresented Indigenous peoples around the world. She is a regular participant at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Caleen received her BA from Chico State University, California in 1975, and received her teaching credential from CSU Chico in 1976. Chief Sisk also earned an honorary doctorate from the University of New Mexico. Thank you, Chief Sisk.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, and hopefully we can share some things here today. You know, we are a small tribe from the Mount Shasta watershed all the way down the McCloud River. And that's our basic home territory. We've been there for thousands and thousands of years. We've been removed from our river because of the Shasta Dam, you know, the big water project for California, the bailout of the years of the Depression, the Great Depression. But the government didn't really treat us very well in the end, even though it passed a law in 1941 to help with that loss. But instead, we basically were placed into a different form of life, which, you know, turned out to be poverty. We had never really had that kind of poverty before, always being able to live off the land and having salmon come. And with the dam, the whole salmon issue stopped. In the meantime, we've been praying for what to do, how to do things, and asking the Creator, you know, what is it that we can do now? Because we're small in number. We don't have a champion to help us out. We've been going to the UN to explain the story of what happens to Indigenous peoples in developed countries, and trying to get a direction. We went to our mountain and we prayed, and you know, we are from Mount Shasta. Our creation story says we came from inside that mountain, along with all of the other spirit beings who chose a form to take care of Mother Earth. And in that choosing was the Chinook salmon, the wild salmon. They also chose to be the wild salmon in physical form. And when we finally chose, as the last little spirit being inside the mountain walking around the fire, to be humans, the Creator said, oh, that one's going to need a lot of help. We better call back the fire spirit and the mountain spirit and the water spirit to help them, to guide them, to show them the different things about what their jobs are going to be, because they're so confused. And the salmon also heard that and came back and offered up his voice. The salmon had voice at that time. And the salmon gave up the gift of voice to people so that the people could communicate. And so when we go back and we pray, you know, the salmon are always close to our hearts. They've taken care of us all of these years, coming and taking care of the land and the trees and everything that needs salmon. And so we set down a prayer of what to do, and the salmon said, follow us. And so there was a prayer that was given, and then in our way, there's always something to do after you ask for a prayer. And so Run for Salmon was that result of that prayer. And as it developed, it's like nobody really knew what that would be, the Run for Salmon. And so we just started. We started and we prayed about it everywhere we went. We went all to the sacred places and put down a prayer to say, how do we do this? Who's going to do this? And it just kind of opened up that this prayer journey is for everybody. It has to pull in all of the people, and especially the younger generations, so that they can put that water in their heart. They can see what those issues are. And so we began and we looked at, where are we going to go with this? And the logical thing was to follow the salmon all the way from the Mount Shasta watershed, all the way to the ocean, because that's what they do. They go all the way to the ocean, and we put down these prayers for them so that we could follow that and we could go along with that whole thing. We put down dances and we put down smoke and we prayed to the water and put the water in the McCloud to ask, help us to do this. And as we went, we put down these these footsteps on these sacred places, trying to bring in that into us. And as we went, we knew that there were other people that we needed to bring into this, other leaders like Karina Gould at the bay. That's where our fish swim into the ocean. They come down the Sacramento River right to the Martinez Straits and into the ocean. And the people, all ages and all groups and all nationalities, were happy to join us. It was incredible that all of these people, were right there on the edge, ready to do something about water, about salmon. And we sang songs all the way down. People were singing and praying and getting along and helping each other and taking that first step, some of them, to be sober on these trips, to be be attentive and knowing what the issues are, all the way from the Shasta Dam down, to say, we need to tell the Capitol. We went and protested at the Capitol for the leaders of this state to help the salmon. This is a salmon state. We should be a salmon state. We should not be a GMO farming state. And the dam doesn't do what people think it does. This water is sacred. It goes all the way down, but as it goes down now, it's changing. It's changing because people don't take care of it. We during the Run for Salmon, we bike ride, we paddle, we run, we horseback ride. It's a multiple of activities that people can do, and of all ages they can do. And so it's pretty amazing that the little children really got it. Some of them drew paintings and pictures of salmon and what should be done for them. And it's like, if 6-year-olds can get this, I think we as adults, we can get this, And so we've had different tribes join in, from the different areas. As we go down the river, we're running into different tribal people. And as we go, we're making those prayers and singing those songs and calling on all the spirit beings, even in the areas where bad things happen to Indians in California. There was a genocide here, and there were hangings and there were killings all along our way. And on that spiritual path, we did feel those things, and we had to pray about them, and we had to like cleanse ourselves so that we could go on. Tears were shed along that path. And as we paddle, we know that in the old days, when you paddled and you slapped those paddles on the water, that was calling the fish. They heard that. They could hear that, because when they come up river and they slap their tails onto the water, they send that vibration out. And so we mimic that with our paddles. And we had a lot of folks be able to do that, to help with that, to see how that feels. And at the same time, it's like imagining that this whole river is full of salmon. Imagining that when we pull in those dugouts, those are traditional canoes, that those fish know about that. They know that. And we also brought in the four-legged, the horses that rode across all the tributaries, putting down prayers that go, these tributaries that go into the McLeod, and all of that fresh, clean water that's coming in to the McLeod and putting down into the Sacramento River. That we have deer and wolves and all kinds of four-leggeds that we wanted to make sure that they knew we know about them. We are still praying for them too. And so the run for salmon, I feel, was very successful, is and continuing to be, because now we're reversing our trip from McLeod. We're going to start at Mount Shasta with the whales and go all the way to the ocean, because our creation story says all the spirit beings took form out of that spring and went to the ocean. So this is our next prayer journey, is to take from the spring on Mount Shasta all the way to the ocean and see the results, that we're a part of. And so I want to go on to the water issues that I have learned about since this journey began, since this prayers have begun. And we've touched out to a lot of different countries. Even we've gone to New Zealand and sang and danced for our fish there, and we've gone to Hawaii and went to Lake Waiau to look at these things, and we picked up different indigenous leaders like Pua Case. She came to our land to see, but you can see her here at this sacred waterfall that we get our water, how clean the water is. That water is running by her feet and around that rock, and you can see the rocks. It's so clean. It's so delicious that, most people don't really know what real water tastes like. Real water without chlorine, real water without any kind of disinfectants in it, and that's bottled water I'm talking about, because that's what the first thing they do to bottle water is put disinfectants in it. And so we took her to this place, and she took us to a place in Hawaii also that is reserved. And this is a picture of the lower falls. And this is where our journey begins on our salmon challenge, so that people understand what the salmon have to go through. This waterfall is more in winter right now, but in the summertime, it's real deep. I mean, the falls is a big drop. And so the challenge is to jump off into this water. And this water is 56 degrees. This is what salmon swim in, 56 degrees. And so it's a breathtaking jump. And some people are ready for it. Then we go to the second falls. This is the second falls. And in the second falls, they swim under the waterfalls, and they feel how aerated the water is. These salmon have to be able to swim in very aerated water, not like the Sacramento. The Sacramento is very thick and heavy water. But the salmon who climb mountains have to make these jumps, and they have to be able to survive in this kind of water density. And so as we went, we also wanted to take the boat ride down the Sacramento River to see exactly what it looked like, because it's been a long time since we've been on the Sacramento River. And so our first year, we took that boat down the Sacramento River and kind of looked at what the river looks like now, with all the dredging and all of the things that people have done with it. And we documented those things so that other people could see, what we are seeing, and kind of know more about the river when we're talking about clean. And you can see the water here behind me on this slide, where it's real chocolatey. And that water is just from Mount Shasta to Sacramento that starts happening. and as it goes downriver, it gets worse because, there's no regulations on dumping water back in from the agriculture. They draft water out and then they dump water back in, and there's no filtration systems that are required for them to do that. And so the water just gets thicker and thicker, and the salmon have to swim through that. But not only that, that's the water that's shipped south for people to drink. And I don't think enough people realize what's happening upstream. You're only looking at what's coming out of your taps, but what's happening upstream is continuing unless we, the people, start saying, we're tired of living in a state that doesn't regulate and doesn't clean up water for all the people. And they have to start by doing some things in the high mountains because, they took away the wolves and they took away the beavers. They took away the water keepers that used to do and trim and keep the water. They keep the salmon from going upriver above the dams. And those salmon dig their spawning beds at least 1.5 feet deep into the riverbeds, which means the river can breathe. Then the river can breathe. But instead, we're going down this other road of, development, I guess. And you'll see the next slide, Will. The signs that we saw along the delta when we went through the delta. And at first we weren't really understanding what all that was about. You see some wind power turbines there, and also the sign for natural gas pipe crossings. And they run these pipes underneath the river. And I don't think people realize, what kind of danger that poses. But there was a time a few years ago that they also run sewer lines across underneath. And there was a boat that ripped that pipeline, and hundreds of thousands of gallons of sewage was dumped into the river before people realized that it was. And so these pipelines are a dangerous thing. You have natural gas coming, underneath. And next slide. And then we also noticed that they have fracking or pumping stations that are so close to the river. We should never allow that. We should never allow anything so close to the riverbank that we can see it. And especially the fracking and the gas piping of this very river. Next slide. And again, there's this, but another concern that we have as Indigenous peoples is, like, you look at this slide, and those big trees there are cottonwoods, and the cottonwood trees are very important to the salmon. They provide a canopy over the rivers. They provide the river so it doesn't get hot. They provide bugs and food sources for the insects in the river. When that cottonwood leaf falls into the water, it provides a lot of things for the ecosystem. But you can see that there's an invasive species, and we haven't really identified what that is yet, but it grows up the cottonwood. It canopies the entire bank. Like on the bottom there would be all willow, but all those willows are canopied under this invasive species, and that species gone up this cottonwood tree. Then the only thing left for that cottonwood tree to do is to fall into the river. And there are a number of these big trees that are now laying in the river like they should not be, because of this invasive species. But we can't seem to get anybody to really care about that, what's happening to the cottonwood trees and the banks of this, this great river, the river system itself. And so as we went down the river, we also saw some of the discharge. And this is a close-up of what that invasive species, it looks like grape, but it's not. But you can see that the discharge, they put the little danger sign up, but there's no filtration systems. And you can see the discoloration of the water that's coming into the Sacramento River from that system. Next slide. And here is a good picture. Like you can see the green part of what the Sacramento River is, but the other part where that water is coming in is a very chocolate looking color. And most people don't see this kind of thing, you know, most of the time. Next slide. And of course, you know, you still have people fishing on the river and nobody's really understanding what's happening to those fish. But in the sloughs, all of those catfish, they're poison. You should not eat no catfish out of those slough that comes off of this river. Next slide. And then you can see again how the murky water really takes over this whole place. And so what I'd like to leave you with is that we as the people of California, we have to rethink, how do we want to distribute this water? How do we take care of this water? How are we going to make sure that everybody gets water? And the last thing I want to say is that, you know, GMO farming does not belong in California anymore. It's only 2% of California's economy that uses 80% of the water. And if we have communities that are having bad water systems like Seville and Alpa and many other towns now that are going to go through the same thing, and the water prices are going up because these agriculture are buying up the water. When you think of Westlands Water District buying 7 miles of the McCloud River, 500 miles north, outside of their district's area for the purpose of owning that water. So anyway, I'm hopeful that we all can come together and do some good things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chief Sisk, for sharing your experiences and raising awareness regarding issues about not just the Sacramento River, but really we all live in a watershed. So, and we'll hear more from you during the Q&A. So we'll get some more information then. So thank you very much. All right. So we have our next speaker, who will be Aditi Anand. And Aditi Anand is a high school climate organizer with Sunrise Silicon Valley and a justice, equity, and anti-oppression team lead for the hub. She is passionate about climate action, especially as it relates to intersectionality, colonialism, and imperialism. Sunrise Silicon Valley, a local hub of the Sunrise Movement, is comprised of many young activists, and some of their recent actions include a wide awake action at San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo's house to pressure him to advance progressive policies, assisting in a wildfire banner drop at Brisa de Año Ranch in Pescadero, targeted email storms, endorsements of local progressive candidates in the 2020 elections, and much more. You can find them at Silicon Valley Sunrise at Instagram. Thank you, Aditi.
Awesome, thank you so much. Hi everyone, I'm Aditi Anand and I'm a high school climate activist with Sunrise Silicon Valley. And I'd just like to say thank you so much, Chief Sisk, for the amazing panel before me. It was so interesting to learn about everything that you and your tribe are doing. It's really wonderful and really inspiring. Okay, great. So today I'm going to be talking about environmental justice as well as the Green New Deal, because obviously climate change is more than just pollution, and it's more than just driving your car and having carbon dioxide come out of it. It's a lot more complex than that, and we need to discuss the solutions, and we need to discuss how to combat it. Before we get started, I'd just like to do a land acknowledgement really quickly. So if you go to nativeland.ca, you'll find out which Indigenous people's lands you are currently on. I am on Tamian Ohlone land right now. By 2030, we will reach the point where climate change becomes near impossible to stop, and the impacts will be devastating to the whole world. It's crazy, but the climate crisis impacts all of us, and it will continue to impact all of us, and it will disproportionately harm low-income people, Black people, Latinx people, Indigenous people, and all of the other marginalized communities who have been constantly denied access to power and resources, and who are treated violently by the systems that we live under. The root of all these problems is the idea that it's acceptable for some people to control and to cause harm to others, and to hurt the earth for their own profit. It's unacceptable that the idea that some people on the earth are expendable for the sake of profit. Slavery and theft of land from Indigenous people, the folks who have been living here before we came and stole the land, as well as anti-Black racism, mistreatment and the underpayment of workers grows from this idea, dumping pollution on low-income communities grows from this idea, and the continuous destruction of land and ecosystems and species also grows from this idea. The solution from the crisis needs to grow from a different idea, the exact opposite, that everyone is inherently worthy of dignity and worthy of respect, and that no one is expendable. In the past, the mainstream environmentalist movement didn't exist, and it limited how they built alliances and what they thought was worth fighting for. For a really long time, for way too long, certain communities have been overlooked in talks of climate change in favor of focusing on the impacts on polar bears and turtles. While that's incredibly important, every time solutions to climate change are discussed, they usually ignore the harmful effects that will hurt marginalized communities. And obviously, climate change does not exist in a vacuum. There are so many other systemic issues that contribute to the disproportionate impact on low-income communities of color, such as colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, and other forms of oppression. The ideas of white supremacy date back to thousands of years ago, with slavery and the exploitation of people of color being prominent all throughout history, from the times of the classical empires till today. Especially after imperialism and colonialism came about, the idea that a people living in an area ought to be eradicated and that their land ought to be destroyed in order for new people to come in and take over has become more common than it should be. And right now, capitalism has furthered human exploitation by allowing the most privileged in our civilization to accumulate even more privilege while actively pushing down the disadvantaged and saying things like, you should pull yourself up from the bootstraps, when you can't pull yourself up by anything if you were never even given a bootstrap in the first place. All of these factors combined drive in the institutional oppression that we see today, and they serve as a way for the dominant people in society to justify their oppression of others and of the earth as a whole. If you look at these graphs really quickly, the top right shows deaths from climate change, the bottom left shows the impacts of climate change on countries, based on their income. And you'll see that the majority of the deaths from climate change will happen in the global south, while the impacts of climate change are going to happen to the more low-income countries, the countries which are poorer, while the richer countries go by largely unscathed. It's really important that when we're talking about climate change and its impacts, we include the narratives of people who are living in the global south and people who are in BIPOC communities, because these are the people who are being impacted by climate change the most, while at the same time not causing it the most. As we're living in the United States, we have a very unique position in which we can control the narrative and we can influence the narrative, while many of us are actually on the front lines ourselves, especially as Californians. A lot of people here have experienced the droughts or the wildfires or anything else, yet we still have a say in politics. We can write to our local politicians, we can vote, we can do other actions to raise awareness, while others really don't have that opportunity. So it's our duty to speak out, and it's our duty to talk about this issue. I live in Northern California, and I live in an area where wildfires are pretty predominant. And the first time when I actually realized that climate change is going to impact me specifically was last year, the 2020 wildfire season. I was sitting exactly where I am right now, and I was looking at the window to my left, and the sky was completely yellow. And it was kind of raining a soft layer of ash down on my desk. I remember being absolutely shocked because every day I look out this window, like I'm doing right now, the sky is bright blue, and it's like that. The sky is over every single person's head, yet the power of the smoke from the wildfires turned the sky a completely different color, so different that I couldn't even recognize what some items in my room because they were bathed in an orange glow. And the fires kept coming closer and closer, and I lived in an area right next to the danger zone. So we ended up being fearful that something might happen. Thankfully, my family and our house were safe, but many others weren't as lucky as I was. Some people lost their belongings, some people lost their homes, some people may have lost someone who was close to them. And every year that climate change gets worse and worse, more people are losing everything. And next year, it could be me, it could be you, it could be someone that I love, it could be any one of us who are losing something that's important to us. And yet, even though I finally realized that climate change is impacting me, it's impacting my family and my community, a few years ago, I was too young to really understand it. Climate change was already impacting people in the global south. I went to India to see my grandparents, and it was 2015, and I walked up to the house, and I opened the door, and I looked inside, and I was shocked because there was a watermark, and it was about to my hip level. And I was short, I was very small then because I was a little 10-year-old girl. But the huge watermark was kind of shocking to me because this is a place where I'd been going to since I was a baby. And these floods, which had come just a few months prior, had forced my grandparents to go and live in their neighbor's house who lived above their flat. And it caused the water to rock into their house with so much force. And we read about it online, and we checked in with my grandparents to make sure that they were safe. But climate change was one of those main issues that led to these floods. It was one of the many other contributing factors. I didn't really realize it at the time, but the global south, people who have lived in marginalized communities, have been experiencing the impacts of climate change much longer than I have. And I thankfully only had to realize it last year, but for the past 5 to 10 years, even more, people have been impacted by these devastating floods already. As Californians, the unique position that we have as frontliners who also have a say in the narrative, we need to demand a comprehensive climate plan that will prioritize marginalized communities. And the answer is the Green New Deal. There are so many horrific impacts of climate change, so the only way we'll be able to stop it is by having a solution that's on an equally large, all-encompassing scale. And you might be wondering, are there really any solutions that are like that? Climate change is going to impact every aspect of my life. How will the Green New Deal be able to impact every aspect of my life as well? Well, the Green New Deal is a 10-year vision to address all the crises that I mentioned before in a way that treats everyone with dignity and with respect. Just to clarify, a resolution isn't a single law. It's more like a roadmap or a vision, and some call it a governing agenda for the many, many pieces of legislation that need to be passed over the years. We see how every crisis that we face lands on top of racism and economic inequality, and every crisis that we face hits Black, brown, and poor people the hardest. These are communities who have already been systematically treated as disposable in this country. So the Green New Deal needs to make sure that those communities are at the table shaping what the actual legislation is like. if you ever heard the phrase, if you're not at the table, then you're on the table, because that's what's happened for the past 300-ish years, and that's going to be what continues to happen unless we prioritize these voices in the drafting of legislation. The Green New Deal was co-authored by scientists and policy writers, and it was presented to Congress by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is a Latina representative. So as you can see, there's many people of color and people of marginalized communities who have been taking part in the writing, the drafting, and the presenting, and who continue to stand behind the Green New Deal. You might be wondering, why specifically the Green New Deal? Why not one of the many other options that people have suggested to combat climate change? And one of them is the carbon tax. But carbon tax, a modest carbon tax, would never be able to stop the huge force that is climate change. If all it would do is kill coal, but it would drive up oil and gas production, because it would cause companies to go for a cheaper alternative, and suddenly oil and gas production would skyrocket. And it's a token investment to pacify environmentalists and make it seem like it's a real solution when it actually can't get that much done. If you want to completely avert a catastrophic rise in temperatures, a global carbon tax of hundreds of dollars per ton would be needed. Currently, the maximum is like $128 in Sweden. You have to suddenly make every single country have that much and even more. That's quite unreasonable. Some kind of price on carbon is not a bad idea in the small quantities, as well as investing in renewable energy, but alone it's definitely not enough to solve the climate crisis, because a huge all-encompassing problem like climate change will need a huge all-encompassing solution like the Green New Deal, one that will be a part of every aspect of our daily lives, from healthcare to transportation to the parks that you go and walk outside in right now. A carbon tax won't really be able to address the many other forms of environmental destruction, such as land exploitation and environmental racism and the destruction of wildlife, which the Green New Deal will address. These are also going to contribute to emissions and overall environmental harm, but there's nothing in a carbon tax that will be able to stop them. The Sunrise Movement, which is an organization that I'm here for and I'm speaking on behalf of, is one of the strongest advocates of the Green New Deal. We were founded after the 2016 elections, and we've been a proponent of the Green New Deal ever since 2019, when it was first introduced. Sunrise is a youth movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. We're building an army of young people to make climate change an urgent priority across America, and the corrupting influence of fossil fuel executives on our politics, and elect leaders who stand up for the well-being. Here at Sunrise's driving principles, our home, our air, and our water are being threatened. And solutions are ready. Green solutions will make all of our lives better already. However, there are some few who are driving us towards catastrophe. We have to be strong. We have to be together. We cannot be divided. And as a majority of people who look out for each other, we will win. So Sunrise Silicon Valley is the local hub of the Sunrise Movement, and it's comprised of many young activists in the Silicon Valley area. Some of our recent actions include a direct protest at San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo's house to pressure him to advance progressive policies, a wildfire banner drop, several targeted email storms, endorsements of progressive candidates, and much more. Climate change has never been more dangerous than it is now, and it will only continue to worsen as more time passes. By 2030, climate change will be irreversible, which is why we need to combat it right now. If you care about our planet, and if you care about future generations, you'll fight for a Green New Deal. And many of you are probably much older than I am, and much older than many of my friends in Sunrise are. However, Our generation is going to be the one that will have to deal with the effects of climate change. If you want to secure the future for your kids and your grandkids and your nieces and your nephews, you'll fight for a Green New Deal. So thank you everyone for listening to me, and I hope that the next time that you read about the horrifying impacts of climate change, or the wildfire in the news, or the polar vortex in Texas, you remember what I just spoke about today. And thank you so much to CPA and my amazing fellow panelists, because it's a true honor to speak beside you.
Thank you, Aditi. It's an honor to have, I think, the only youth panelist in the whole convention. So it's an honor to have you, as well as our other two panelists. All right, so we're going to go to our next and final panelist, Zoe Berg. So pull up her bio. All right. So Zoe Berg is the project director of Americans for Responsible Technology, or ART for short. ART is a project of Grassroots Communications, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Port Washington, New York, established in August of 2018. Within a period of just 2.5 years, ART has blossomed into a national coalition of more than 150 local safe tech action groups across 43 states, with a monthly reach of over 500,000 individuals. The organization's mission is to equip local activists and legislators with the tools and guidance to effectively raise awareness of wireless radiation health risks and to safeguard communities from unnecessary 4G and 5G wireless infrastructure deployments, particularly in residential areas. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you so much for having me today, California Progressive Alliance, and Amy for inviting me to speak today. And it was an absolute pleasure, incredibly gratifying to hear Aditi's story and Chief Sisk's stories. I mean, the work that you're doing is so incredibly important. And I got the chills, honestly, listening to you speak. It's just, we need so many more people like you both. And I'm just so grateful for what you're doing. And I'm going to pivot on over to a slightly different issue here, but all sort of within the same vein. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if you can see this. You can see it?
Yes.
Yeah. The sound's okay?
I can't hear any sound yet.
Okay.
But we can hear you very well.
Okay. All right, great. So yeah, no, there's no sound on the presentation, but so I'm here today to sort of provide a little bit of an overview regarding 5G wireless technology, what wireless radiation is, and sort of some of the environmental justice related issues pertaining to the deployment of 5G and wireless infrastructure in general. So here we go. What is wireless radiation? Really briefly, it is a type of non-ionizing radiation. It is on the electromagnetic spectrum. And we don't really need to go in depth. I'm not an engineer, so we're not going to go in depth about sort of the technicalities here. But it was once believed by the scientific community that non-ionizing radiation was not powerful enough, or at least this has been sort of an underlying principle upon which, the FCC and other governing bodies in the United States have operated, that wireless radiation it's a form of non-ionizing radiation that is unable to break DNA, damage DNA, have biological impacts. That theory has been proven false by thousands of peer-reviewed independent scientific studies on the issue. So we will get into a little bit of some of the most pressing research studies. How do you measure wireless radiation? We'll go into that a little bit later in the presentation about what you can do to reduce your exposures to wireless radiation. But this is a device called an acoustometer. And it's, there are lots of different types of meters that range from, $100 to $10,000. But this is one that we often use just to sort of get a ballpark range of how much electromagnetic radiation are we being exposed to. So I'm not going to go too deeply into the timeline of events here because we do have limited time, but 5G stands for the 5th generation of wireless technology. The G is generation. So we started with 1G in 1980. Each G is sort of helped facilitate different technological capabilities. And so it's almost like on a decade basis. You can see 1G was 1980, 2G 1990, and now we're up to this 5G issue, which is quite unique compared to the other generations of wireless technology, and we will get into a little bit of that in a moment. But just so you can see a timeline of the progression of how this technology has advanced and what it is being utilized for and what it has been able to facilitate. That's sort of the purpose of this slide here. The Telecom Act of 1996, which was signed into law by Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton at the time, it's responsible for it actually set human wireless radiation exposure guidelines for the general public and occupational exposure guidelines. These guidelines are very insufficient. And so when you talk about wireless technologies with, if say you're at a hearing with Verizon or AT&T, they say that their equipment complies with the Federal Communications Commission's, that's the FCC. We'll talk about that in a minute, but the FCC's guidelines, so there's really nothing to worry about. In fact, that's really not the case. These guidelines only consider short-term thermal effects associated with it's actually not even chronic exposure, associated with exposure to wireless radiation and its short-term exposures. It does not consider the known adverse biological risks associated with exposure that have been very well documented. So they're basically insufficient and inadequate guidelines that the industry uses to they just hide behind it, these guidelines, and say, well, the FCC is saying that it's fine and we just have to abide by this, and we're actually pushing for more stringent guidelines, and there is a federal lawsuit pending about that. So anyway, we'll keep going. It's a pretty multidimensional, complex issue, but I'm going to do my best to sort of sum it up. Government involvement in terms of, the siting of telecommunications equipment and not even monitoring, but regulating, emissions is the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. The FDA works in conjunction with the FCC because the FCC has no scientific expertise or medical expertise. So they were sort of tapped to consult with the FCC about some of the health-related concerns associated with wireless radiation. The EPA was actually defunded the same year that the Telecommunications Act of 1996, the Telecom Act of 1996 was passed to study wireless radiation health effects. So there is currently no regulatory body or scientific body that is responsible solely for evaluating the health effects associated with one of the most pervasive environmental toxicants of all. So just a very uplifting factoid there. Here we go. The last time that the FCC updated its wireless radiation exposure guidelines, cell phones looked like this, like big bricks with antennas that you would just, you would string them up from the top. This is, technology has changed so much, and the proliferation of wireless devices has increased to such an unbelievable degree that it is pretty insane that the FCC has refused to update its exposure guidelines for 25 years. I'm not going to go into this too much. It's just another demonstration of how much exposure we are now experiencing compared to when those guidelines were first created in 1996. Huge increases in the number of cell phone users, which then translates to wireless infrastructure deployments, because that's how we actually get our signal, is from our wireless signal from those wireless infrastructures. So why is wireless radiation a health concern, a major health risk? Concern is not even really, the appropriate term for it. It's a risk. The majority of science, peer-reviewed independent research that hasn't been funded by the telecom industry has determined that wireless radiation does pose a variety of serious risks, a lot of different disease endpoints associated with this kind of exposure, ranging from oxidative stress, which can develop into cancers. Different types include thyroid, brain, heart, adrenal gland, parotid gland, and more. Reproductive health problems. For instance, infertility is a huge issue. Sperm damage, decreased mobility and viability of the cells, DNA damage of the actual sperm, cognitive and learning issues, and physiological dysfunction. So cognitive learning is sort of ADD, that kind of thing. In 2011, actually, the World Health Organization classified wireless as a 2B carcinogen, putting it in the same category as lead and diesel exhaust. So we're just going to keep going. Children are most vulnerable to wireless radiation exposures due to their thinner skulls and higher brain conductivity. And this is actually a model that was developed by Dr. Om Gandhi. It's in a published report. And you can just see how much more deeply the radiation penetrates into the brain of a child. So you have 5-year-old, 10-year-old, and an adult. And so, this is very, very scary image. You're not often able to sort of visualize concretely what the damage, the kind of damage this is doing and sort of how it proliferates. But this is quite a representation of it. So let's try to go to the next slide. Okay, our environment is at risk too. So given that today's panel is really talking about, environmental justice related issues, the environment is also at serious risk. And a slide I haven't quite included here, but is worthy of mentioning, is how much are we mining, all of the raw materials, so we're mining so much to be able to produce these technologies, the e-waste that we're generating, the amount of energy consumption required to actually power this infrastructure. It is incredibly significant. And, not to mention, the concrete environmental risks related to sort of CO2 emissions and energy consumption and that sort. Insects and bees and trees and mammals are also, it has been documented that wireless radiation does impact those organisms as well. This was a study published in 2018, and it discusses how sort of 6 gigahertz frequencies, which is what the kinds of frequencies that they're looking to utilize for 5G, would actually increase the absorbed power of Western honeybees and other insects between 3 and 370%. So any sort of shift in this absorbed power can lead to lots of different issues. When you absorb that much power, it leads to dielectric heating. So you have physiological, a breakdown of normal functioning within the body of these organisms. So as we know, pollinators are kind of a keystone species in our world. And if they go, we're not in a good spot. So anyway, we'll just keep going with that. So e-waste, energy consumption, impacts on insects, pollinators, mammals are all discussed in the science. And this is one of the most important studies that we have documenting risk from wireless radiation is actually the U.S. National Toxicology Program study, which is a branch of the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Now, this study was it was commissioned by the FDA in 1999 to determine once and for all, do cell phones actually cause cancer? And, the result that they got was pretty significant, very significant, and quite frankly, very scary. $30 million US taxpayer dollars later, and 20 years later almost. This study concluded clear evidence of an increased risk of carcinogenesis associated with 2G and 3G wireless radiation frequencies. So exposure to 2G and 3G wireless radiation frequencies. And the type of cancer that they found, the clear evidence, was malignant schwannoma cells of the heart, which are heart tumors, which makes sense because the heart is the electrical center of the body, and as is the brain. And they found some serious issues with brain tumors, some evidence of brain tumors and adrenal gland tumors and DNA damage. And so this was a really big deal because, this is a gold standard study. The results were analyzed by an independent panel of 13 medical and scientific professionals. And science doesn't usually see $30 million for a single study. So this was a very big deal, a really watershed moment. You know, when the wireless companies themselves sort of, you know, discuss that they could be held liable for some significant damage and incur significant expenses and potential litigations related to wrongful death lawsuits pertaining to exposure, we know we have a problem. So we'll keep going. So what is 5G exactly? It is, again, the next generation of wireless technology. They utilize these small cell facilities, we'll have pictures of those in a minute so you can learn to identify them. But they utilize new, much higher frequencies of wireless radiation that have never been tested for long-term human safety. And these transmitters, because these frequencies don't travel very far distances, they need to be installed in much closer proximity to where people live, every 200 to 2,000 feet, because these frequencies don't travel, again, very far. So the density, the configuration of these antennas is unlike anything we've ever seen. And it's not just outdoor. These are indoor antennas as well that we're talking about. And I'll get into that in a minute. And what is the purpose of 5G? It's really to enable the Internet of Things, video streaming, self-driving cars, you know, data mining capacity, data, you know, just a lot of different things, like smart diapers too. I mean, that's an Internet of Thing item. Can you imagine? I mean, this is actually an antenna attached to a diaper that will then send a notification to your cell phone and tell you when to change your baby's diaper if it's wet. So, yeah, there we go with that. It's not too many words on that. It's just kind of completely outrageous. How to identify small cell transmitters? They take a couple of different, you know, configurations: streetlights, utility poles, and slimline. Here are some real world examples. This one on the right was taken actually 10 minutes from my house on a state road. This one on the left is in Huntington, New York. These antennas, just because they are smaller than what you see on those huge towers that you see on highways, those are called, usually they're monopole towers. Just because these are smaller than those just because they're small doesn't mean they're innocuous. These are putting out incredible amounts of power, incredible amounts of radiation. These are essentially mini cell towers on your front lawn. So I'm going to go through a couple of other photos. Here are some other examples, also taken in New York, but these are all over the place. On the bottom of the pole is where, you know, the hardware and the power source for the pole. The top is the radiating source. That's where the wireless radiation is being emitted from. I mean, look at this. This is in San Francisco. The school speed limit one is in San Francisco. That is what, 10 feet from that person's bedroom window? So mini cell phone towers are essentially going up next to where people are sleeping. This is an indoor antenna. This is at I forget which football stadium this is at, but this is a Verizon small cell and then this is on the right, an Ericsson small cell that you would install indoors to help boost 5G signals. Reinsurance companies are waving a huge red flag when it comes to 5G, classifying 5G as a high impact liability risk and putting it in the same category as climate change. We don't have time to go through this, but this is part of the report I just referred to. The insurance companies actually, what's the word? They exclude EMF health risks from their policies. They were burned so badly by asbestos and tobacco, and given all of the research and science on wireless radiation, they know that this is really, it's just a matter of time before, you know, the bubble pops, the bubble bursts, and everyone becomes much more cognizant of this issue as more people get sick, as more, you know, awareness occurs. So they're not touching this. They do not insure wireless telecommunications companies for personal injury or anything related to EMF exposure. The projected global proliferation of small cells is unbelievable. As I said, we have, you know, we're looking at a huge densification of these mini cell towers in very close proximity to the public. So it's not just outdoor, it's also indoor, which I think people forget about sometimes. We're not going to go through this too much, but the FCC is more of a cheerleader for industry rather than an actual regulatory body for the telecommunications industry. And in 2019 of January, they passed a declaratory ruling. It was passed in September of 2018, but it went into effect in January of 2019. And it limited local control and state control over the placement of wireless facilities, specifically small cells in the public right of way, which has been very problematic for a lot of local and state governments because they want to exert control over the placement of these devices. They are not safe. They erode the aesthetic integrity of communities. They are responsible for, property devaluations. We're seeing more and more data coming out about that. People don't want to buy a house next to a mini cell tower. It's ugly and the science is there. So that was problematic. I would just recommend to folks who are looking to really get ahead of the curve. The key is to get ahead of the curve on 5G to ensure that you don't have a mini cell tower pop up on your front lawn. The key is to stay ahead of the curve and be in the know related to the deployment process in your community. You can file FOIL requests, which is a Freedom of Information Law request to find out if a telecom carrier has filed applications to install a 5G antenna near you, and you are entitled to those permits as they are considered public document. And you want to keep your FOIL request quite focused. You don't want to say, okay, I want all small cell applications for the city of Denver, Colorado. What that's going to be 400 or more. Or less. I mean, it's going to be a huge number and they're not going to be able to process that kind of a request in a timely manner. So you could, miss what you're really needing for your own sake by creating by submitting a request like that. So you want to keep it pretty focused. Here's a sample FOIL request. I'm not going to go through this because hopefully the presentation may be shared with I'm not sure, a little bit later. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds. What is it? Local telecom ordinance, and why is it so essential that your community has a strong one? A telecom ordinance is essentially a set of local laws that govern the siting of telecom equipment throughout your community. It could be on private property in the public right of way. Each community has its own ordinance. Okay, here are really strong, important things that need to be included in your ordinance to ensure that you're being properly safeguarded from these antennas. You want to include randomized radio frequency emissions testing. Who is monitoring how much radiation is coming off of these antennas? Nobody. So there's that. You want to require that you have random testing at the expense of the telecom applicant on an annual or biannual basis. You want setbacks, installation setbacks in sensitive areas, particularly residential areas. I see communities like I showed you in those pictures earlier, 20 feet from people's windows, these things are popping up. There needs to be at least 500 foot setbacks. So that means you can't install within 500 feet of a property line of a residence. Pre-notification to residents about installations. A lot of times people are just left completely in the dark about the deployment process because they weren't notified that this was happening. And one morning they wake up and there's a mini cell tower on their front lawn and they were like, what the heck happened? So you want to make sure that those requirements are in place. Fall zones, not going to go too deeply into that. It has to do with ice and things like that, or wind load or things like that. We're running out of time. Insurance and liability, environmental protections, aesthetic requirements, property devaluation considerations, and ADA compliance. Just really briefly on the ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a very interesting new legal strategy that is being employed throughout the country to protect people who have underlying medical conditions who could be particularly susceptible to damage from RF exposure, radio frequency exposure, which is wireless. So that is something that you want to make sure all of the, that ADA things can, we just want to make sure that we have that kind of language in the code so that is a consideration in all siting issues. Communities with strong ordinances, a lot of places in California near where you guys live, Palo Alto, Calabasas, can be used as sort of some templates or guides if you're looking to reach out to your community to develop a stronger ordinance. These are resolutions that have been passed. Some didn't put any from California on here. I haven't seen one from California on here, but I'm sure there has to be one. When your legislators say, oh, well, our hands are tied, there's nothing we can do to regulate the deployment, that's not true. There are a lot of preemption issues, but for the most part, there are a lot of things that can be done. Like I just showed you, all of those different things can be included in ordinances. You do have to check with your state laws to make sure that they are in compliance with the state laws. But for the most part, those are really good, things to talk about. And I'm just going to go to the end here. We have lots of key quotes from key stakeholders, the American Academy of Pediatrics, ways to effectively push back, start your own 5G action group. You should rally for the adoption of a strong local telecom ordinance, pass a local 5G resolution, like a couple of the ones I showed you earlier, which can actually raise local awareness of the issue and further legitimizes the credibility of the health and environmental concerns associated with it. We have a toolkit where you can print out free flyers and things like that to help notify your community about these issues at 5gcrisis.com/toolkit. State legislation, you want to oppose any streamlined bills that might be in the works, or just even if they've been adopted, you want to oppose those. Advocate for adoption of a committee to evaluate 5G health and environmental risks, like New Hampshire did. In the federal arena, House reps should be supporting HR 530, and Senate reps should be supporting SB 2012. This is important. So I will, hardwire your connection to the internet, keep your landline, turn your Wi-Fi routers off at night when you're not using them, or put them on timers. If you can't hardwire your connection, never put your cell phone near your head or on your body. Use wired headsets, not Bluetooth. AirPods, no good. Use speakerphone shielding opportunities. There are lots. Regularly monitor your EMF levels and stay connected with us. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Follow us on Facebook. I post a ton of new material and content on there about the latest news. Together we can protect our communities. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm sorry I'm running a little behind. There's always so much to say. But if you have any questions, we'll get to that in a minute. So I'll just stop.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And thank you for raising awareness on this issue. Just recently, I told somebody who is very involved socially and environmentally in causes, and he didn't know there was an issue with 5G, and he's hearing, everybody's hearing all the great publicity coming from telecom. So thank you for raising awareness regarding the issues.
Thank you.
And so we do have some time for a few questions. And so I chose one question for each panelist. And Zoe, this will also probably give you some more time to address the last portion of your presentation. But I'd like to start with Chief Sisk. And the question was, let's see, will there be a run for salmon in 2021? And if so, how and where can people get involved in that issue?
There will be a run for salmon in July of this year. And we'll be putting that on a page, a Facebook page of it's run number 4 salmon, or the Winnemem Wintu tribe will also be posting information about the gathering, and then we'll see where we are with COVID and how safe we need to be and how people can be involved. But we also have online class lessons that we have teachers have put together a lot of lessons about salmon and the run for salmon, and they'll be on the run doing a live stream for those classrooms that might still be in session. But yeah, the best place would be on the Run for Salmon page on Facebook.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is for Aditi. What action do you recommend we take to improve climate change now?
Obviously, individual actions are very important. Try to recycle, try to be conscious of the amount of plastic and all of that you consume. However, if you want to take action on a larger scale, you can join your local Sunrise Hub. We're all over California, so you'll probably be able to find one very much near you. And you can also go to Sunrise's website and do some trainings and teach your family, teach your friends about about climate change. And if you're old enough to vote, which many of you probably are, I'm not, then please vote consciously and vote for climate champions and people who will keep our best interests in mind.
Thank you. All right, so this one is for Zoe. What are the strongest, most effective strategies and tactics to protect residents from 5G harms?
A strong telecom ordinance. So a telecom ordinance that addresses setbacks, installation setbacks, that requires pre-notification to residents so you don't get blindsided by the rollout process and you have an opportunity to organize and voice your concerns, and advocate for, the placement of these things outside of residential areas. You really don't want, they shouldn't be in residential areas at all. Commercial areas, industrial areas are, much more appropriate, obviously, because that's not where usually lots of people live and sleep. I mean, if you're in Manhattan, it's a different story, or really dense urban areas. The key really is to stay ahead of the curve. Once these antennas are in, they're really tough to get out. So if you need any help sort of helping, craft local ordinance, related telecom ordinance language, or, and I should have mentioned, there's actually a very active group in California right now called 5G Free California, and you can find them at 5gfreecalifornia.org, I believe, and they are very active and would also be absolutely willing to help with your efforts.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I live 1,000 feet from a cell tower, a macro cell tower, 4G, and they've recently added 5G antennas to it. And so I've learned a lot. I recommend that everybody get a meter or borrow one from somebody and assess your own devices. And then, you can also see if there's radiation coming off of cell towers that are near you. So yeah, we really recommend that so you can make choices and make changes within your own home. Okay, great. So for Chief Sisk, there was a question, did they stop the gas pipelines under the Sacramento River? Oh, you have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah. No, they're not stopping the pipelines underneath the Sacramento River. It's going to take a whole lot more, and it'll probably take a legislation and some sort of curbing, who can do that so close to the river. And I think most Californians haven't been paying attention to these things and trusting our government processes. And I think it's time that, we as the people make some changes that corporations need to abide by.
Seems to be the theme between the three panelists. Definitely need stronger regulations to protect the people. And that means electing people who aren't beholden to these corporate interests, usually because they've received campaign funds from them. So thank you. Aditi, where was the watermark from the San Jose floods?
They were not from San Jose floods. They were from Chennai floods. Chennai is a city in India. So there were some floods in 2015 in South India. And my grandparents lived in Chennai, so that is the floods that I was talking about. And the watermarks were in the water was sweeping into their house.
Thank you. And then last one for Zoe, and then we'll just see if anybody wants to wrap up with any final comments. Somebody asked, is there any indication that the FCC guidelines developed in 1996 might be updated and published?
It's possible. There is a federal lawsuit ongoing. A decision should be coming out within the next 2 to 12 months, I would estimate. The Environmental Health Trust, in conjunction with the Children's Health Defense, has sued the FCC for not updating their guidelines in 25 years and for neglecting so much science in their consideration of updating guidelines. So it is possible. The way in which the judges, it was a a three-panel judge, and 2 out of the 3 of the judges indicated that they would be ruling against the FCC verbally that day, which is quite unusual and quite significant for us. So that would require if that happens and they rule against the FCC would have to revisit its guidelines and actually consider the science that it excluded from its analyses, and potentially update the guidelines to make them stronger, but we'll see about that.
So about 2 to 12 months, they'll come out with their decision.
Yeah, should be, because the hearing was in January of 2021. So just a little while ago, 6 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And so I think what we'll do, we have about almost 10 minutes left. And so I just want to give you a chance, since you've heard each other's presentations, if you would like to just any thoughts, like maybe we go run back through, like starting with Chief Sisk, if you want to make any final comments, and we can do that with each one and before we close the panel.
Okay, that sounds good. I was glad to hear the other 2 presentations and about 5G, because, you know, we are a small community. We have a cell tower up on the mountain that's pretty not so good. But we travel into these things, and we've heard about those G5s and about the cell phones and things. And it's good to have that education about, you know, not sleeping near your phone and that kind of thing, because you don't hear that anywhere really. I mean, there's no warnings at the Verizon store when you go and buy one, right? They don't tell you any kind of cautions. And I'm glad to see that we have the youngest panelist on here of the conference, which is always great, because, you know, I really encourage the young people to get involved and start learning and start activating their power, you know, because this is the world we're going to leave them. And so, you know, with our own tribe, you know, we have a lot of young people. And of course, in the Native American communities, we are abundant with young people because of the situation that has occurred. We actually have a younger population than we do elders right now, which is a scary thing for tribal knowledge, and that COVID has really brought that to the front, where many of the elders of tribes across the nation have suffered from COVID and have left this world earlier than they should have, and not passing down those things that they should have in the times that are appropriate for the people to receive that. And so I think the tribal nations are really taking on something new about knowledge. But around the world, you know, the people are talking about the indigenous people's knowledge, and that we need to start following some of that. And so I would like to just leave at that. Hopefully we have raised awareness here today. Thank you.
So thank you. Aditi, do you have any final comments, either just reflecting on what everybody else has had to say, or that final things that maybe you forgot to say that you would like to add before we end?
Yeah, I don't have much else on my topic, but I really enjoyed hearing both Chief Sisk and Zoe speak about 5G and about the issues that indigenous folks face, especially in the water supply and salmon especially. That was so interesting to hear. But just like to go off of Chief Sisk's last comment about the knowledge that indigenous people hold all across the world. I know I spoke a lot about the Green New Deal, which is like very new, and it's like a new solution to the climate crisis, but there's so many old, very useful techniques that people have been using forever, and the Green New Deal understands that we have to listen to the indigenous people who managed to take care of our world for the past several centuries, thousands of years, and then obviously it's all gotten really bad now, but like managing wildfires, there's so many techniques that I read about, like controlled burning and making sure that forests are healthy And there are just so many techniques that have been lost over time, and even those that are still here, we aren't using them as we should be. So I think that it's really valuable, and we should be learning more from that. And about 5G, I remember the first time I really heard about 5G was like a year and a half ago when I was in a debate tournament and I was arguing against 5G, but everything went over my head. I have no idea what I said. I don't think I understood what I was saying. But then I started learning more and more about it, and it's really alarming that we don't know as much about it. I think a lot of it is probably because I'm on the younger side. I'm quite young, so I don't necessarily know everything, but from what I've heard, it's really dangerous, and especially thank you, Zoe, for talking about it today, because I didn't know a lot about it, and now I feel like I know a lot more, and I should probably look in to see if there's 5G near me.
Well, and one thing I want to clarify is 4G, 5G is all wireless radiation, right? It's all bad. But 5G, they're bringing it even closer to people with higher frequencies, but it's all bad. And you can have all your technology and do it much safer. Like Zoe mentioned, you can hardwire your devices with an Ethernet cable, connect directly to your router, and then turn your Wi-Fi off. Then you don't even need your Wi-Fi, right? And you'll have a much better connection. So there's a lot of benefits to just hardwiring and turning off the Wi-Fi. All right, Zoe, last comment.
I'm just really grateful to have been a participant in today's events. And Chief Sisk, I was really taken by, the photos of the salmon run. And we are, my family is actually, we're very big fishermen, my brother specifically. And so I've always had just a real deep appreciation for fish and wildlife. And it was very heartening to see so many people from all ages trekking across, and it was just a really beautiful thing. And if I'm ever out in California during that time, I would love to be part of that initiative and raise awareness. I mean, salmon are just such beautiful creatures, and those waterways need to be protected. I mean, the cottonwood trees, that was quite alarming. They are just being strangled by that invasive species, and it is really detrimental. And everything is interconnected. So thank you for that. And it was an absolute pleasure to present alongside you. And Aditi, thank you so much for all you're doing in the Sunrise Movement. It is really inspiring because we are both young people, and this is both, it's on all of us, but we're carrying a pretty heavy bag. And, your presentation was absolutely fantastic. Your anecdotes were really, very hard hitting and very powerful. And I really appreciate all that you're doing with your colleagues. And I hope that you will continue this effort and you'll do some lobbying in DC one day. I could definitely see you doing that if you'd be interested, as you're just fabulous too. And as far as 5G is concerned, this is the next tobacco situation that we're dealing with here. This is an incredibly important, serious issue that very few people are aware of. And as Amy had said, it's all wireless radiation, but 5G is bringing this much, much closer to where we live and where we work and where we sleep and where we rejuvenate. And it's a serious concern. The lack of safety testing, the misinformation, disinformation, the lies that just continue to perpetuate around this issue, because we are all wireless technology and technology in general is so deeply embedded in the ecosystem today. And it's sort of scary to think psychologically, there's like these psychological barriers. I don't want to give that up. What can you replace it with that's better? I don't want to give that up. What's the alternative? And this is the alternative. I don't know if you can see this. This is an Ethernet cord. You could buy this at Staples for like $10. And this is how you hardwire your connection to the internet. It is faster, it is safer, it is more secure than wireless will ever be. And the key is to reduce your exposures as best you can. Your voice matters. You matter. You have to speak up. You must call your legislators. You have to stay ahead of these things. You have to stay on top of these things, because no one else, you have to be your own best self-advocate. And it's just been incredible, because we are a relatively new group, and I know I'm running out of time here, but It's literally, two people are responsible in a lot of these situations for passing major state laws. For example, the New Hampshire thing I mentioned, that was 2 or 3 people involved in that initiative. So every person matters. You could be the one that changes the tide, turns the tide on all of these things. So again, thank you so much for today, and upward and onward.
Thank you. And I do want to mention on the Americans for Responsible Technology website, there is a model ordinance, because she mentioned the ordinance, the importance of a strong ordinance. They have a model ordinance that you can just take off their website and use in your own community. So I want to thank all of you. I feel honored to have moderated this panel of such amazing women. And thank you not only for coming today and sharing your knowledge, but also just for all the work you do in the community. And I hope that everybody out there watching feels inspired to do, whatever's important to you, to follow that and to work in your own community to make your environment better. So thank you so much. And hopefully I'll see all of you again soon.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Amy.
Thanks.